What is going on, everybody? Matt here from the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books channel, and today I'm going to go through my top crime comic picks for 2023. And before we get into that, if you guys wouldn't mind sharing, subscribing, commenting, it really helps me out and lets me know what you guys want to see more of. So, with that being said, let's get straight into it. So normally I don't really have any kind of order to these lists, but this time I'm going to rank them in ascending order. So we'll start off with the one I thought was solid, but wasn't my favorite of the year. And that is a little book called Noir Burlesque by Enrico Marini. Now this is part of the Hardcase crime line that Titan Comics puts out. And this is just like one of your solid, straightforward noir stories that's kind of set in what seems like the 40s or the 30s. But what sets this book apart is the art. The art is beautiful in this. It's all painted by Enrico Marini himself, which he uses watercolors. And I believe this was actually released in Europe first because this is a slightly oversized hardcover, so it's more of the European album size, which means it's a bit wider and taller than a normal North American hardcover. And like I said, this is kind of a straightforward noir crime story. So we get the main character who's named Slick, who's part of a robbery that goes bad, and because of that, he owes the mob some money. Of course, he's trying to get away from that, but his plot to escape gets messed up when he gets involved with a beautiful burlesque dancer, and all his plans go belly up. And with this, the story's good. Like I said, it's solid. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is just like kind of a basic noir crime story. There's nothing to me that was like, oh, this is amazing, except the art. The art is fantastic in this and definitely makes it stand out above similar types of books. My number 3 pick for best crime series of the year is this book called Friday by Ed Brubaker and Marcos Martin. And this one is a bit different. Brubaker and Martin are actually putting this out through a digital service first, and then they're printing them in these smaller size trade paperbacks. And just for reference, here's the first trade of Friday, and here's what a normal hardcover looks like. So not only is the format kind of different, it also is a different kind of story. It's about a young woman named Friday who just recently graduated from high school, and she's going back to visit her hometown for Christmas break after her first semester of college. It turns out during her high school and middle school years, her and a young Sherlock Holmes type of friend used to solve mysteries and crimes in the town, kind of like Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys. But unfortunately, now that she's kind of grown up, her and her crime detecting friend have had a bit of a falling out, and they're not really sure where their friendship is going. But of course, this book isn't about their relationship necessarily. It's more about crimes that happen because, unfortunately, something bad happens to her friend and she has to try to solve the mystery surrounding that. Now, this book isn't just a straightforward crime thriller. There's actually some supernatural elements to it, which I thought was kind of fun and interesting and kind of different for Ed Brubaker, as he tends to write just more straightforward crime. Usually there isn't too many supernatural elements in his books, so I thought this one was very interesting and unique. I thought all the characters, especially Friday, were very engaging. And I found that every time an issue ended in this series, I wanted to immediately read the next one. And that's why this one made it to the list this year. It's definitely not well known. And speaking of Ed Brubaker, my number 2 book for this year is Where the Body Was, which is by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Now this book just came out. It's about 2 weeks old now. And this is your straightforward whodunit murder mystery. This book has the same quality as all of the Brubaker Phillips books, so if you've read Reckless or Criminal, it's definitely of the same quality as those. But I actually think this was a tighter mystery overall than some of his other books, maybe because it is just a single self-contained story, but I really liked the flow and the pacing of this. And the way the story is set up, you never can quite guess who the killer was. There's definitely a lot of red herrings and people who look like good suspects, but there's never actually anything that tells you who the killer is until it's revealed at the end. So it kept me guessing the whole time, which was definitely a fun experience. This book takes place in the 80s in a single neighborhood where we learn all about the different neighbors and all their idiosyncrasies and the scandals and gossip that's going around between all of them. And in the middle of this, a body is found in the middle of the neighborhood, and all of them seem to be good suspects for who killed him. So I think this book is just an all-around good whodunit crime story. And like I said, it's self-contained, so it's perfect for just grabbing a cup of coffee and sitting back in your favorite reading chair for a couple hours in an afternoon and having a solid good time. Now, for my number 1 pick, this was really hard because to me, this kind of could have been interchangeable with Where the Body Was, but I thought this book was really under the radar and more people needed to know about it. So my number 1 pick is the 2-book graphic novel series Homicide, which is based on the book by David Simon of the same name and was actually the inspiration for the show The Wire and the show Homicide, which was kind of like a precursor to The Wire in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, this book is by Felipe Squarzoni, and it is different than all the other ones, as this is based on a book about real homicides in Baltimore. And unlike the others, it actually follows the homicide detectives of Baltimore that have to hopefully solve these violent crimes. Now, because of this, it doesn't really follow a traditional story narrative, although there is a narrative through it. But what it does is it introduces us to the kind of seemingly random deaths that occur in the drug-addled parts of Baltimore, and we get a first-hand look at what the detectives go through in trying to solve these crimes. The way the book is structured is that we get thrown a bunch of these crimes all at once, each of them seemingly more horrific or more pointless than the previous. Because a lot of these crimes seem to be random or over things like $8. But the most horrific of these crimes are, of course, children who are killed, and those take the most toll on the detectives trying to solve the case, as well as the city itself. And those are what kind of take the narrative through the whole 2-book series. So it starts off with this introduction of all these different crimes and the detectives who are solving them, and then as those cases get worked and either go cold or get solved, we follow each detective through their journey in an overlapping manner. So the only thing linear is time, but you really get the feel of how a detective is thrown this giant case. It goes a little bit cold. He gets another case thrown at him. He has to kind of drop the first case in order to solve the second case. And then he's got to go back to the first case. And this is going on with multiple detectives, so it is definitely a little confusing at times with which detective is doing what case. But because the crimes themselves are so horrific, that is how I was able to follow which detective was which case. And one thing that's different about this book is that because it is based on real life, it doesn't necessarily have happy endings. So it is more kind of a character study on the police and how they solved crimes, at least in the late 80s, and what life was like living in these areas in Baltimore during that time. And like I said, if you like The Wire, a lot of this will seem familiar to you because this graphic novel is based on the novel that inspired that show. Well, those are my top crime picks of 2023. And I will also say that all of these books are definitely for adults. The only one that you could give to a teenager is probably Friday, and maybe Homicide if your kid's really into The Wire or something. But Noir Burlesque and Where the Body Was are definitely for adults. Specifically, Where the Body Was has quite a bit of nudity and sexual situations, so don't read that one on the train like I did, or else you might have an awkward conversation with the person you're sitting next to. So those are my top 4 crime books. Definitely check them out if you guys saw anything you liked, and we will see you all in the next one.